It was the morning of June 10th, 1944. Oradour-sur-Glane was a quiet village in the heart of France, where families opened their shops, farmers prepared for the day's work, and children filled the streets with laughter. After years of war, this peaceful community hoped the worst was finally behind them. No one could have imagined how quickly everything was about to change. The village felt calm and alive. Children chased each other through the cobblestone streets, playing with simple handmade toys, while parents smiled from nearby doorways. It looked like an ordinary summer morning, filled with laughter, friendship, and the comforting rhythm of everyday life. Across Oradour, people continued their daily routines. The baker carried fresh bread to his customers. The blacksmith worked at his forge, and farmers tended their fields. Despite the ongoing war, the people of this small village held onto a sense of normal life and quiet hope. Only a few days earlier, Allied forces had landed in Normandy. News of the invasion spread quickly across occupied France, giving many families hope that liberation might finally be near. Around old radios, people listened carefully, believing the long years of fear could soon come to an end. While life continued peacefully inside the village, a convoy of German Waffen-SS vehicles was moving steadily through the French countryside. Their engines echoed along the narrow road, bringing danger closer with every passing mile. The people of Oradour had no idea that these trucks were heading straight toward them. Farmers working in the nearby fields noticed military vehicles in the distance. German patrols were not unusual during the occupation, but this convoy seemed larger and more heavily armed than usual. A feeling of unease slowly began to spread, even though no one yet understood what it meant. Shortly after 2 o'clock that afternoon, German military trucks rolled into Oradour-sur-Glane. Conversation stopped, shopkeepers stepped outside, and children paused their games. Within moments, armed soldiers spread through the streets, and the peaceful atmosphere disappeared. The soldiers quickly secured every road leading into and out of the village. No one was allowed to leave. Families looked at one another with growing confusion, wondering why their quiet community had suddenly been surrounded by armed troops. German soldiers ordered everyone to gather in the village square. Men, women, children, and the elderly walked silently through the streets, unsure of what was happening. Parents held their children's hands tightly, trying to remain calm as fear quietly spread through the crowd. Soon, hundreds of villagers stood together under heavy guard in the center of Oradour-sur-Glane. An uneasy silence filled the square as everyone waited for answers. No one knew that these ordinary families were standing at the beginning of one of the most tragic events in World War II history. The village square grew completely silent as hundreds of frightened civilians stood surrounded by armed German soldiers. Parents held their children close, neighbors exchanged anxious glances, and no one understood why they had been gathered. Every passing second made the uncertainty feel even heavier. A German officer stepped forward and calmly addressed the crowd. His voice carried across the square while soldiers stood motionless around the civilians. Although his words sounded controlled, the tense atmosphere made it clear that this was far more serious than a routine inspection. Without warning, the men were ordered to separate from their wives and children. Emotional goodbyes filled the square as fathers hugged their families one last time. Many tried to remain brave, believing they would see each other again within a few hours. Under heavy guard, groups of men were marched through the narrow streets toward different barns and workshops. They repeatedly looked back at their families, hoping for one last reassuring glance, while uncertainty followed every step they took. At the same time, the women, children, and elderly villagers were directed toward the church. Many believed they were simply being gathered for questioning or protection. Quiet whispers and worried faces reflected the growing fear as the church doors closed behind them. Inside the church, families sat together in complete silence. Mothers held their children close, elderly women whispered prayers, and anxious eyes watched the doors. The atmosphere felt heavy with uncertainty, as if everyone sensed that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by distant bursts of gunfire echoing across the village. Parents instinctively embraced their children, while frightened civilians turned toward the doors, desperately trying to understand what was happening outside. Moments later, thick smoke began spreading through the church. Breathing became increasingly difficult, visibility quickly disappeared, and confusion turned into panic. Families struggled to stay together as fear swept through the crowded building. As the smoke grew heavier, people desperately searched for a way to escape. Mothers carried frightened children. Elderly women leaned on one another for support, and every corner of the church filled with confusion as hope began to fade. From miles away, thick smoke could be seen rising above Oradour-sur-Glane. Few people outside the village understood the scale of the tragedy unfolding there. Within a single afternoon, a peaceful community had been devastated, leaving behind a story the world would never forget. Inside the church, fear overwhelmed everyone. Mothers held their children tightly. Elderly women whispered quiet prayers, and the thick smoke made every breath more difficult. The once peaceful building had become a place filled with confusion, panic, and desperate uncertainty. As the smoke became thicker, panic spread rapidly through the crowded church. People struggled to breathe and to see through the haze. Parents called out for their children, while frightened families searched desperately for a way to escape. The trapped civilians searched every corner of the church, hoping to find another exit. Neighbors helped one another through the smoke, refusing to leave anyone behind. Even as hope began to fade, they continued searching for any possible chance to survive. Through the smoke, Marguerite Rouffanche noticed a small rear window high in the church wall. It was the first real opportunity anyone had seen. Gathering all her strength, she realized this narrow opening might be her only chance to escape. With remarkable courage, Marguerite climbed toward the small window and managed to escape outside. Every movement was filled with danger, but she refused to give up. Her determination would make her one of the very few people to survive the tragedy. After escaping, Marguerite hid beneath thick bushes beside the church. She remained completely still as smoke drifted overhead and German soldiers moved through the village nearby. Every passing minute felt like an eternity as she fought to remain unnoticed. From her hiding place, Marguerite watched smoke rise above Oradour-sur-Glane. The peaceful streets and familiar homes she had known all her life had fallen silent. The village she loved was disappearing before her eyes. As the smoke slowly cleared, an eerie silence settled across the village. Empty streets, abandoned homes, and damaged buildings stood motionless, creating a haunting reminder of how quickly ordinary life had been shattered. When it was finally safe, Marguerite carefully emerged from her hiding place. She looked back at the silent ruins with shock and disbelief. Everything she had known was gone, and the scale of the tragedy was only beginning to sink in. In the years that followed, Oradour-sur-Glane became a lasting symbol of remembrance. Rather than rebuilding the original village, France chose to preserve its ruins so future generations could witness the consequences of war and remember the innocent lives that were lost. In the days after the tragedy, French authorities and Allied investigators entered the silent village. They carefully documented the damage, photographed the streets, and collected evidence. Every ruined building and abandoned personal belonging helped tell the story of what had happened in Oradour-sur-Glane. Investigators worked methodically, recording every detail they found. Burned homes, damaged vehicles, abandoned bicycles, and everyday household items remained exactly where they had been left. These records would become an important part of preserving the historical truth for future generations. After World War II ended, the French government made a remarkable decision. Instead of rebuilding the original village, it would remain untouched. The ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane would stand forever as a memorial to the innocent civilians who lost their lives. A new village was built close to the original site, allowing survivors and future generations to move forward. Yet the old village remained exactly as it was, reminding visitors that remembering history is an essential step toward building a more peaceful future. In the years that followed, courts reviewed evidence, heard witness testimony, and examined wartime records connected to the tragedy. While no legal process could erase the suffering, these efforts helped ensure that the events of Oradour-sur-Glane would never be forgotten. As the decades passed, nature slowly returned to the abandoned village. Grass grew through the cobblestones, ivy covered the stone walls, and silence replaced the sounds of everyday life. Yet every corner still carried the memory of the people who once lived there. Today, thousands of visitors from around the world walk through the preserved ruins in respectful silence. They come not only to learn about history, but also to honor the memory of the innocent lives forever changed on that day. The historic church remains one of the most powerful landmarks in Oradour-sur-Glane. Standing quietly above the village, It serves as a lasting reminder of the importance of protecting civilians and preserving the lessons of history. Oradour-sur-Glane is more than a historical site. It is a place of remembrance. Its preserved streets encourage every visitor to reflect on the devastating human cost of war and the importance of choosing peace over violence. More than 80 years later, the silent ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane continue to speak across generations. They remind us that history must never be forgotten, because remembering the past is one of the most powerful ways to protect the future. Thank you for watching.